Blessings, good evening to you all. If you're living in Melbourne, seems like the whole of Melbourne went out today to do something or other, take advantage of the end of lockdown and the good weather. So I hope you enjoyed your day. We have a few questions tonight. First question is, Luang Por, can you speak about the life and practice of Luang Por Plien, please? So, many of you may even have met Luang Por Plien when he used to come to this monastery. He used to come to Australia quite regularly up until 2007, when he became more ill with age. Unlike some of the other teachers people have been asking about, many have passed away a long time ago. Many people still recall Luang Por Plien with affection. His monk's name was Panya Padipo. So Luang Por Plien Panya Padipo is a forest monk who lived most of his later life in Chiang Mai, northern Thailand. And died, can't remember which year now. How long ago? 5 years ago. 5 years ago. We attended his funeral, but you attend so many funerals as a monk, sometimes the dates get blurred, but about 5 years ago we went to his funeral in Chiang Mai. But he was born in northeast Thailand, Sakonnakhon province. And like some of these other teachers as well we've been talking about, he had an interest in Buddhist practice from a young age. His parents were very devoted Buddhists. His mother would go to the monastery regularly to keep precepts, make offerings. And his early years as a child, his faith in Buddhism was boosted by meeting Luang Por Prom Chirapanyo, who we talked about a few weeks ago. He was his first teacher, so another great forest monk, enlightened monk. You can just think that the good fortune of being born in northeast Thailand. You've got enlightened monks coming past your house every day maybe to collect alms. So the opportunity to make offerings to arahants, hear the Dhamma from them, serve them, help them, support them, was there, which is quite an amazing thing. So the young Luang Por Plien was seeing and serving and listening to Dhamma from very wise and peaceful monks from his early years. And one thing Luang Por Prom taught him as a child was how to walk meditation, which is not that common even in Buddhist families. Often people learn to sit meditation, but walking meditation is not so popular. But the forest monks have always emphasized the practice of walking meditation as very useful. And so Luang Por Prom taught the young Ajahn Plien how to walk meditation. So even as a teenager, he was practicing walking meditation. And particularly in those days, I think he was a teenager in the 1940s or early 50s. So there really wasn't a lot of transport in northeast Thailand in those years. So you did walk a lot of places. So he said he learned to walk meditation, and then he could walk meditation as he went about his business. His family were reasonably well off, farmers and traders, and he, from a very young age, showed an aptitude. He was smart, he was intelligent, and had an aptitude for trade, for engaging in buying and selling things. And by the age of 18, he'd already made some money and built up contacts trading between different villages and towns in his region, and he was trusted with that. But at the same time, he had an aspiration to become a monk from this young age, and he kept asking his mum and dad if he could become a novice monk first, and they kept saying no. And that went on for many years, a kind of tussle, which is not uncommon. You know, mum and dad have great faith in Buddhism and devote themselves to the practice of Buddhism, but still not willing to give up their son to become a monk. Very common. So he put effort into his work, earning money and gaining various skills. And he even, because he was involved in buying and selling retail, he became knowledgeable, particularly about medicine, because in those days there wasn't much healthcare in northeast Thailand. So anyone who was intelligent, could read, write, and could learn new things, you know, could potentially become quite important in a village, because Luang Por Prien learnt about medicines and how to inject basic medications, how to buy and bring in different medical equipment and medications for the village. And even though he wasn't a qualified doctor, he obviously had great aptitude for it, and he was interested to study medicine, he said, from a young age. So even at the age of 18, he was looked on as somebody who knew about the treatment of various illnesses. And for many people who couldn't go to hospital, it was too far away, too expensive, too difficult, they would come to him. So he actually gained a renown as being having some medical knowledge and being able to help people in a basic way. He didn't claim to be a doctor or anything, but he could give them basic help. And his family wanted him to go on and study medicine, and he himself, part of him, wanted to, but at the same time he also wanted to become a monk. And the pull to the robes was stronger. His father died, if I remember, over the years coming here and also visiting him in his monastery in Thailand. You know, we heard a lot of his life story, so I'm trying to recall what I can. I think his father died, and then his brother became a monk temporarily. So that got him a little bit unhappy, because he said to his mum, "Oh, you allowed my brother to become a monk. It was a temporary ordination, but you allow him to become a monk. Can I do it?" Still, no. His mother loved him too much, didn't want him going anywhere near the monastery and becoming a monk. He wanted him close by. So he carried on working and just kept nagging and asking his mum to become a monk. And eventually, I think it was his grandmother died. And it's the tradition to ordain when your elderly relatives die, you ordain often to make merit for them. So that was the excuse. He asked, "Can I become a temporary monk?" And his mum finally reneged and said, "Oh, you can become a monk for 7 days." But in the forest tradition, you know, we train as anagarikas in white on 8 precepts first. So he went to live in the monastery, the local forest monastery, for about 40 days, I think, as an anagarika, before ordaining as a monk for 7 days. But of course, 7 days is not very long, and once he was in the robes, you know, he liked it. He wanted to learn everything, learn the texts, learn the chanting, learn meditation. And after 7 days, he'd only learned a very small amount of things. So he just pleaded with his mum and said, "Look, I really need to learn more. It's going to help me with my life. Can I stay for a whole vasa, one range retreat, which is 3 months?" So he got an extension. And then at the end of the retreat, he asked for a further extension, and he said that's how he managed to stay in the robes, even though his mum was very keen for him to return home. She really loved him. But he managed to stay in the robes. So as a young monk, he had Luang Por Prom as his first teacher, but then he also lived with some other teachers He went to find Lumpur Juan, who's another enlightened disciple of Ajahn Mun. And he also did some wandering with other monks in the forest, because in those days, like, he wanted to go and study with Lumpur Juan, who was one of the famous teachers in that part of Thailand. Just to go and study with a teacher means you have to go and walk for many days, weeks, months even, to get to the monastery, because there's no other way of getting there. So just the walk to Lumpur Juan's monastery was quite a hike, and full of adventure and some danger, because they met tigers and elephants. I seem to remember him saying, he had to avoid herds of elephants sometimes. And you just sort of hide, because they can be quite dangerous, and it doesn't take much to set them off and get them aggressive. So him and his group of monks at one point had to hide behind rocks and in a certain part of the forest and wait for a whole group of elephants to pass by. And another time, on his way to see Lumpur Juan, they stayed in a little hermitage, and he was walking meditation every night. He really liked walking meditation as a young monk when he was still strong and fit. He did many hours a day, and he'd say he'd walk in 2-hour sessions. So whether it's the middle of the day or the middle of the night, he'd walk 2 hours at a time. Sometimes then he would sit, sometimes walk again. And he was also one of those monks who would always be up later than everyone else. Everyone else goes to bed and he'd be still meditating, sitting and walking and pushing himself. And he attained samadhi already, in this first year as a monk. He was having some experiences of deep samadhi, very peaceful. Not all the time, he said, but enough to give him inspiration to keep practicing. And there was this time he's staying in this hermitage on the way to find Lumpur Juan. I think Lumpur Juan had been staying there, and then he had left, and then Lumpur Blien arrived, and he'd missed the teacher. So anyway, they stayed there for a while, his group of friends. And he walked there, and they were there every night for 7 days. He was walking on his meditation path, and this is in the middle of jungle, big jungle area. And a tiger just came and sat and watched him every night next to his walking path. It didn't threaten him, it didn't attack him or anything, it just sat and watched him. And he would spread metta to this tiger, and it would stay there for an hour or two, just sitting watching him. He thought, it almost looked like it was lonely. And then it would scamper off into the forest and no doubt go and look for its prey for the night. But he said every night this tiger came and sat right next to his walking path as he meditated, which, if you think about it, is a sign of how steady his mind was and how already well developed his mindfulness and particularly his practice of metta, kindness, was. To have a tiger next to you every night for 7 nights. Anyway, eventually they went on to see Lumpur Juan, and he went and saw a few other teachers, and then he was having a problem as a young monk with his samadhi practice. He said he had this problem. He'd enter a state of samadhi, deep samadhi, what you call jhana or appana samadhi, and his mind would kind of go quiet. It'd go still, but totally quiet. He couldn't hear anything, couldn't sense anything, no thoughts. But he also realized he didn't know anything during that state, and he can go into that state for an hour or two, or even longer, and come out, and he wouldn't know anything. There was no real insight or knowledge was arising, no deeper understanding. So he was looking for a teacher to help him understand what was going on with his mind and how to deal with it better. So that led him, I think, after a few years as a monk, he went down to southern Thailand, where another great teacher, Lumpur Tate, was staying for quite a few years, and he was very skilled with the practice of samadhi, meditation. And he went and stayed under the guidance of Lumpur Tate for a couple of years, I think, and would ask him questions. And Lumpur Tate would explain that, this is they call, one of the terms they use is the nibbana of a Brahma. So it's not Nibbana as in the Buddha or an Arahant enlightened monk. It's Nibbana of a Brahma, is where one can go attain this state of samadhi where all one's suffering, pain, distraction, everything just disappears, and one goes to this very still state for long periods of time. And as long as one can attain that, it's like almost like the mind doesn't want to experience any kind of stimulation. It doesn't want to develop vipassana or contemplate in the normal way, anicca, dukkha, anatta, impermanence, unsatisfactoriness, and not self. The mind is just refusing to do that contemplation. So it's just, as it were, stuck in its samadhi. It attained the state of samadhi and then stuck there. So they call this Nibbana of a Brahma god, somebody who attains deep level of samadhi. The other term they use for this state is like a chicken incubating its egg. They say the samadhi of a chicken sitting on its egg until the egg hatches. So it's like, it's got the potential, if you've attained deep jhana, there's a lot of potential there, very important factor on the way to nibbana, enlightenment, except for the mind doesn't go beyond its attachment to jhana, it just sticks there. So like a mother chicken sitting on the egg, there's the potential of this egg to hatch, but it's just sitting there, it hasn't hatched yet, and the mum's keeping it warm. So that's how Luang Por Tate described the samadhi of the young Luang Por Plien. So he was teaching him to come out of samadhi and develop vipassana. And that was a theme for quite a few years, I think, in his early years, of teachers encouraging him to develop more vipassana insight into the five khandhas, because his samadhi was already quite strong. And while he was in the southern Thailand, he was also developing the kasina, which he's famous for, having developed the fire kasina. And he was using a lantern, the flame of a lantern, which can be steadied because the lantern has a glass case around the flame. He would watch the flame, memorize it, and use that as an object to develop the fire kasina, which he did. And with the fire kasina, he started to develop psychic powers. And this is when he was very young. So, through a life of good practice and meditation, many people have heard stories about his psychic ability. So it was already from an early age he was developing that. Anyway, he returned to northeast Thailand from the south. His meditation was improving, but then he felt he still needed a teacher, so he went north to northern Thailand, where a lot of Ajahn Mun's disciples were living, and he particularly went to live with a monk called Luang Por Du. Luang Por Du was a very well-known meditation master, again known for his great practice of jhana and psychic ability, as well as being enlightened, and known for his sharpness of mind to know the minds of other people and what kind of teachings they need. He was very good at that, and he had a good reputation as a teacher who could help people using his mind and his skill with samadhi. So Luang Por Plien was interested to go and study and practice with Luang Por Du, which he did. And Luang Por Du was very famous, very well known for his psychic ability to read people's minds, if you want to call it that. Also to know the future. Luang Por Plien was living with Luang Por Du, and every morning Luang Por Du would tell Luang Por Plien who is coming to the monastery today to offer food, who it would be, their name, the way they look, their dress, where they're from. He would know every day in advance. They call this the Anagatayana, the knowledge of future events. And Luang Por Du would know who's coming to the monastery, things that were going to take place, events that were going to take place. He could talk about them before they happen. So Luang Por Plien was learning from Luang Por Du a lot of the use of the mind, psychic powers, as well as developing his practice of insight meditation. And Luang Por Du was very fierce, teaching him to contemplate the asupa, the unattractiveness of the body, to particularly counter the lust and sexual desire a human being will have. And Luang Por Plien also went on to study with another very well-known and well-respected disciple of Ajahn Mun, and that was Luang Por Wen, who lived not far from Luang Por Du. And Luang Por Plien, over the years, became very close to Luang Por Wen, who was another enlightened teacher, and so he just gradually, with these different teachers, was learning how to use his mind for the ending of suffering, to penetrate the Four Noble Truths. But he said at the same time he picked up a lot of psychic ability. It was obviously his vasana, his character and karma from many lifetimes. He'd obviously been practicing meditation, which brought him to where he was in possibly his last lifetime. So he was in Chiang Mai, practicing first with Luang Por Du, who got very old, and then with Luang Por Wen, and he was helping Luang Por Wen and studying with him and got quite close to him. And then eventually settled in Chiang Mai area in the monastery that we knew when he was alive and would visit him in Medang district, Wat Aranya Vivek, the secluded forest monastery, which had been a well-known place of practice for many monks for many generations before Ajahn Kalyano, but he settled there and became the abbot. And he also looked after Luang Por Wen a bit in his last years. He didn't live that far away. And as he started to become a teacher with his own monastery, he just became more and more well-known for his skills, and particularly for his loving kindness, for his kindness and compassion in helping people, teaching them, helping them with their problems, and became greatly loved by a huge number of people and well-known, and eventually started being invited around the world. And so he traveled to many, many countries teaching meditation, teaching the Dhamma. What people tend to remember are the stories about psychic phenomena, his psychic ability, and I must say I have experience of that with him as well. So it is, the sort of thing people love to talk about and remember. But we should remember he was a very good monk in the general term. He studied, he meditated, he practiced to penetrate the Four Noble Truths, free his mind from greed, anger and delusion, and that's what he was teaching every day. Nevertheless, as some monks do have psychic ability, they can use that to inspire people, motivate them to practice, and so he would. And always these strange things happening around him, unusual things. So I remember one of the first times he came to Melbourne and we were giving a public talk in a hall, and they set up equipment to record his talk. And I had to translate the talk, but I also had to set up the equipment, and it was all recording and testing and going well. And then when the talk was given at the end, we turned on the recording to check that we've got it so we can keep it for the future. Nothing had come out on the tape recorder. It was just totally blank, even though it had been working. So very strange. And there were many of those kind of stories about technology, cameras failing to take his picture, maybe because the person hadn't asked permission. And so they take a picture of him and nothing would come out on the film. That was quite common. One day he came to visit us in Bangkok. We were staying a place called Dhammaram, and he was caught in the Bangkok traffic with a driver. And we were waiting there, and we were waiting and waiting 1 hour, 2 hours. I think we waited about 2.5 hours for him. He was late for the meeting. And everyone was kind of meditating, walking around, reading books, waiting. There's a whole group of people waiting, or chit-chatting, waiting. And suddenly all the electricity in the building we were in went out for no reason at all. Just stopped. The aircon stopped, the lights went out, everything stopped. So I said, oh, I'm sure Luang Por Plien must have arrived. And someone looked out the window, and sure enough, his car had just arrived. That was a very common thing, electricity going out whenever he arrives, lights going out, recording machines stopping, cameras stopping. It's quite common. And one of the things he'd learned from Luang Por Do was to also to be able to know the future, how to predict things, how to know the future, and also to know people, what they were thinking. So another time I remember we went to visit him at his monastery in Chiang Mai, and in a vehicle with a minibus with about 3 or 4 monks and half a dozen lay people. And it was the late afternoon, we'd been traveling to other places, and we're coming to his monastery, and the lay people were just discussing in the vehicle where they would find food to offer to our group of monks the next day. As you might, you're just planning, oh, we've got to provide some food for the monks tomorrow, where shall we get it? And they started to argue where the best place to get it, which market they could buy food, or which restaurant they could take the monks to, or where they could find some food. And they just started arguing, and they got quite heated in their argument, different opinions. Then we entered the monastery, and so everyone kind of quietened down, and we went in and we bowed to Luang Por Blien, and the monk sat and talked to him for a while, said hello, and then he turned to the lay people and he just said, you know, offering food to monks is a really meritorious, it's a good thing to do. It shouldn't be something you argue about or fall out over or have disagreements over. You know, try and think of the goodness of offering food, then you won't argue about it. And then all the lay people are just sitting there looking at each other, saying, how did he know? Because no one had told him. And there's many, many stories like that over the years from different monks and lay people. He seemed to know what they were thinking and pull it out and explain to them if they were going wrong in their thinking. Maybe if they were angry with someone, he'd encourage people to be compassionate. I once remember we visited him, and he'd just had a visit from some of the most senior army generals in Thailand, and they were having a problem on the border with Burma because there was a lot of refugees coming in because there was fighting between the army of Burma and refugee groups on the border. It's spilling over to Thailand, and they have a problem. What should they do? And he could see they're all very angry, and they just wanted to kind of force the refugees back because they were just causing trouble for the army, making work for them to deal with the problem, and they just wanted to use force. And so he gave them a talk all about compassion for people who have lost everything, you know, refugees. They've lost their homes, their land, they've been injured, they've been threatened, in a state of shock or fear. So he just said, look, you've got to practice compassion. That's the correct response in this situation. And he spent a lot of time calming down the soldiers so that they could go back and do their duty, but with a sense of compassion for the people who were suffering. Another time he came here, and then he went back to Thailand, and he was invited by the Queen of Thailand to go to southern Thailand because there was some, as there still is, there's some conflict between different religious groups down there, right in the southern tip of Thailand. So she invited him to spend a week traveling from monastery to monastery in southern Thailand with the instruction, please just spread metta to everybody, to calm them down, to make them think straight, to reduce the chances of violence and conflict. So he was invited just to spend a week spreading metta, which he said, well, that was very easy for him because he does it every day. You know, that was his practice. In later years, just sit and spend hours spreading metta, he said, to the whole world. And he'd go to different countries and he'd give Dhamma teachings with great energy and great kindness. And this is because he'd learned, you know, how to meditate late into the night or all night, regularly through his life. He was somebody who slept little. He'd come to this monastery, and it was quite normal for him to sleep at 1 or 2 a.m. He'd teach the lay people, teach the monks, do his own chanting. He loved to chant the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta and other suttas. And he'd stay up until 1 or 2 a.m., I think one time even 3 a.m., and then 6 a.m. early in the morning he's already up. It's not like he'd have a lie-in, he'd be up again and ready to teach, ready to help people. And he could help people all day long and then all night long. And he'd travel around Australia from monastery to monastery, teaching, helping people, solving their problems, giving them encouragement. And he'd be in Thailand doing that, and wherever he went around the world, he'd be doing that same thing. So he was a very giving person. And he had, great energy because he developed great samadhi, and he just got used to practicing late and thinking of his practice more than his own health sometimes. People used to be worried that he'd damage his health because he rested so little. I remember he once told me he went to Singapore and stayed in a temple there called Wat Anand. It's quite a small Thai temple. It's very stuffy, small buildings with small hall and small bedrooms, hot, stuffy. It's not a very easy place to live, and he had to give teachings all day to people, then all evening. And he said he got back to his room at about 11 o'clock at night. It's so hot, sweaty, stuffy air. And he thought, I'll have a rest. I've been teaching all day long, had no rest for myself. Large crowds had been coming to see him. And he just lay down, and he suddenly had this vision of Luang Por Wan, his teacher at that time, suddenly popped up on his bed, sitting there next to him, and just scolding him, saying, "What kind of a lazy monk are you? You haven't done your meditation for today." So having taught from morning until 11 o'clock at night, giving all his energy to the laity, he said he was so ashamed and so startled by seeing his teacher, who just manifested in his room, that he got up and meditated for the rest of the night. So he was that kind of person. He could meditate for hours and hours. He had such a strong mind. And if you ever went to see him, sometimes people would bring out the photo album of some of the amazing photos of him meditating, and the aura of his citta could be seen in the photos, or he'd be blessing, and the blessing with holy water, sprinkling holy water, and the holy water would be just rays of light. So many amazing photos, many instances of him reading people's minds, knowing their karma, what kind of karma has led up to their problems, knowing the future. He even displayed that here. Like when he first came, we were just applying. This is 2001. We were applying for a permit to build the monastery with the local council. And generally the council was supportive and helpful. And generally the local people here were very supportive, but there was one or two doubters who were not sure that a Buddhist monastery was good for Warburton, and so they were making a bit of noise. And we weren't sure that the council would vote in our favour, because they have to vote on a planning application such as ours for a Buddhist monastery. And that was, I think it was about January, February, it's probably 2002 then, yeah, it's maybe 2002. And the vote was coming up, and we said, "What do you think, Luang Por? Do you think we'll get our permit? Do you think they'll vote in favour for us?" And he said, "Yep, but one will vote against. You'll get it 8-1, because there were 9 councillors in the Yarra Ranges Council." And sure enough, the next day they voted 8-1. How he knew that, only his citta will tell you. So they voted 8-1, and then we had the heaviest rain for 10 years in one night. It just bucketed down. It's a kind of celebration. And he said, "Yeah, the Nagas are celebrating. There's a lot of Nagas around here, beings in different realms, these different deva-like beings, snake-like beings." He said, "There's a lot of these devas and Nagas around. They're all celebrating." So I could go on. There's a lot of these stories just from my personal experience. And then, of course, everyone else has their stories. Many other monks know his abilities with psychic powers, his metta, his kindness, his compassion in teaching people. And he was always a joy to be around. But he also had very, very simple teachings as well, very kind of practical, obvious things. Like, he's a very clean, careful monk. as many monks are. You're taught, you teach yourself, and you were taught by your teacher to look after your requisites, your robes, your bowl, the place you live, to be humble, to be content with little, not to ask people for anything, just to get by on what you've got, and to look after wherever you live. So when he travelled, he was always very clean and careful to look after the room that you gave him, whatever monastery. Even on aeroplanes, you'd travel on an aeroplane with him. When he'd go into the toilet in an aeroplane, if you're in an aeroplane, many people use the toilets, and often they're a bit messy when you go in. He'd clean the whole thing up before he left the toilet. Having used it, he'd clean the whole place, just like you see the staff, the cabin crew would do that. He'd do that. So he'd come out, and the cabin crew would go in, and they say, "Oh, he's cleaned everything." He was that kind of person. He'd go to a monastery and he'd clean the toilets, wipe everything down, leave it all very spick and span. He'd clean his room before he left the monastery. He's a very kind of well-conducted, well-mannered person, and very compassionate in many different ways. You'd travel with him, he'd always have gifts for people. He'd have amulets or beads or photographs or medicines. As I said, he knew a lot about medicine, so he'd sometimes have all these little medicines that he would give away to people. I've been walking around the airport in Chiang Mai or Bangkok, and he's just walking up to all the staff in the airport, whether it's the cleaner or the ticket seller or the air crew, he'd be giving them things. So people are always very happy when he was around, and he'd always be visiting people in hospital, visiting people at home. Very, very kind, compassionate monk. So I could, I've gone on for quite a while talking now. I could go on for the rest of the night talking about his kindness and how he displayed it, but nevertheless, he was a well-practiced monk who gave a lot, having practiced well himself, then gave a lot to the community in many countries. So maybe I'll leave that there tonight. There's another question. Luang Por, please can you give advice on how to deal with the grief of losing a loved one? Well, a good question, an important question, because everybody loses a loved one sooner or later, don't they? We will sooner or later, we will be lost to someone else. When we die, there will be people who grieve about us. When our loved ones die, we grieve about them. Even our pets, everyone. Friends, distant relatives, close relatives, family members, we grieve. Teachers. We feel sad. Why? Because we've become attached to them through our life, and our love and our goodwill for those people is not yet pure. So whether it's your child, your friend, your parent, your teacher, this is part of our practice, is contemplating that attachment that comes up through our life, and try to reflect on the truth to help manage that attachment and reduce it, so that our love does become purer. So that means you love someone, but you're not clinging to them, and when you cling, then you don't want them to be sick, you don't want them to die, you don't want anything to happen that is not what you want. You don't want anything that's not agreeable to you to happen to that person because you're attached. And that's something you have to keep contemplating over and over again. One of the chants we do is, I will become sick, get old, I'll die. Everyone I love and like, I'll separate from them one day, sooner or later. So if you reflect on that every day, you're becoming familiar with that idea, and already that's a step up, isn't it? You're becoming used to the fact that one day we won't be here together. It's not, ideal. What the ideal is, we go on forever and ever, and we sing songs like, eternal love, and I'll be with you forever and ever. Or what Buddhists tend to do is say, well, if you do die, then I hope we get back together again next life, and we start again next life. But the reality is, this world, we call it samsara, but you could say the world that we live in is a place of impermanence. Our life is a conditioned thing, in the sense there's a beginning, there's an end, there's birth, there's death, and even through our life there's constant change. That's normal, that's nature, that's natural. So we have to keep reflecting on that, become mindful of the change, of the fact that this body will get old, sick and die, the body of the people we love will get old, sick and die, and we will separate. Ideally, you're doing this regularly so that when the time comes that you do separate through death, you're at least somewhat prepared for it, or ideally really prepared for it, and you can accept it. Why do we suffer with death, the thought of death, but also the death of a relative or friend? We suffer is because we can't accept separation. We can't accept the truth that human beings can't live forever. We don't want it to be like that, and yet it's like that. So we have to accept we're only here temporarily. The people we love here are only here temporarily. And if the people you love are still with you, well, that is your kind of energy to really appreciate them while you have those relationships, while you're here together in the world. Appreciate the time you have with your loved ones. Use that time well to do good things. If you fall out or disagree, then heal that quickly, so you're not wasting your time or damaging your relationships, because one day you'll be gone or they'll be gone and you won't be able to repair the relationship anymore. So keep good relations with people, appreciate them, help them when you can, support them. Once they have gone, well, perhaps one of the best ways to deal with grief is bring up gratitude, appreciation for the life of that person, whatever you loved in them, the good of that person, the memories of things they said and did, the events of their life, how they've helped you, how they've helped others. Reflect on that and bring up the gratitude. So even though it's painful that you've lost them, you can also feel good about all the good that they did and that you knew them and you shared in their life. And that's something to be happy about, even though they've gone. And that helps you to adjust by remembering them and going deeper than, the physical person, of course, must die because the physical body doesn't last, but the goodness of the person doesn't die. The good that person did to you, to others, for themselves, stays in your memory, in your heart. It stays around because it's mental, it's karma. It's not bound with the physical body. And so much of the time we look at a person as their physical body. So of course when they get old, sick and die, we're disappointed, we're unhappy. But the goodness and the good things they did hasn't died. It's still there. It's just there's no physical form anymore. So you have to come back to think about their life with gratitude, remember the good things, and dedicate your life to their memory. If there's somebody who meant something to you, that's your motivation to go on and do more good and honor and remember them in a good way, using your life to do good things for yourself, for others, and sharing that back with them, wishing them well and appreciating them. It may take time, but depending how attached, how strong the attachment, well, the pain of grief may take slower or quicker time to subside. But what helps is this process of developing gratitude, appreciation, and moving on in your life, but doing good things partly as a way of honoring and remembering that person. The last question: how do we train and develop our mind to see that things in the world are anicca and not to cling to them? A very similar question in a way. Well, like you said, it's a training. It's part of our mental training, mental cultivation is developing, sometimes we say the perception of anicca, the perception of impermanence, meaning you're noticing or taking note of, paying attention to the impermanent nature of both physical things and mental things. So physical thing, the changes in your body, the changes in other people, physical change, the weather, the environment is constantly changing. The activities of humans bring in change, don't they? They build things, they knock things down, you buy things and then you get rid of them and you buy new things. There's change going on all the time. People get sick, then they get better or they die. Change. With aging, you can see if you've been, you've got friends or people you know who you used to see regularly, and then you stopped seeing them the last year because of lockdown, and you hardly saw them or not at all, and then you see them again, and notice a few more grey hairs, a few more wrinkles. They've aged, and if you don't see somebody for a long time, you notice that. So the perception of impermanence is something you can just develop very simply with your physical environment, your body and other people and the world. And also on the mental level, your thoughts are constantly changing, aren't they? They're arising and ceasing. Good thoughts, bad thoughts, interesting thoughts, boring thoughts, random thoughts, distracted thoughts, very high and refined thoughts, very concentrated states of mind, all kinds of mental states, thoughts, emotions, feelings running through our mind, and they're all changing all the time, every day. Could you even count how many thoughts you've had since you got up this morning to this point? It's thousands. How many feelings have you had? Feelings of pleasure, pain, subtle, coarse, many. How many memories pop up into your mind and disappear again? How many sights have you seen? Sounds have you heard? Things you've tasted, smelt, touched. So much you can't remember them all, just one day, let alone a whole lifetime. Sense contact, sense consciousness is constantly changing. So this is one way we develop insight. What helps is to establish mindfulness. You're aware in the present moment, and then you notice things changing on you all the time, in your internal experience as well as in the world around you. And so our teacher Ajahn Chah used this sort of very simple reflection. He said, it's not sure, is it? Whatever is subject to change is not sure, it's not certain, it's not fixed, it's changeable. You're noticing that more and more, and that brings your mind in line with the way things are, because when we don't see change, we tend to get fixed on things and see things as fixed experiences, and we tend to attach, so we want things to be the way we like and the way we believe they should be. We want our body to be fixed, permanent, solid, young, healthy, look good, feel good, but it's always changing. It doesn't do what we want. Anything you buy in this world, any product, whether it's a house or an item of food, a phone, the biggest or the smallest thing you buy or obtain in this world or make, it changes, it'll break, it gets lost. So when you get a new product, you buy something, just remind yourself it's not sure. This will not last, this will change. Your moods change, it's not sure. You feel really good, you wake up in the morning, you feel really good, inspired, energetic, going to go and do a few things, but it's not sure. Maybe later in the day something goes wrong and you feel lousy, miserable, and just want to crawl back into bed and disappear. Your mood changes, your thoughts change, your feelings, emotions change. So it's a way of looking at your experience to unlock and unravel a lot of attachments. You say, okay, this is good, this thing I'm experiencing, this thing I'm doing, what's going on, it's good, it's right, it's what I want, but it's not sure. It may change. Or something's very bad, some unpleasant experience comes into your day, but it's not sure. That can also change for the better. Beginning of pandemic, COVID pandemic, everyone's saying it's the end of the world, it's the end of society. But the Buddhists are all going, I'm not sure. Now we're coming out of pandemic, or at least managing it better and getting out of it, and certain things you might say are returning to normal. It's not sure. Maybe it will change again. The economy changes. Someone was saying today, there may be hyperinflation. That's when the price of things change very quickly. Change is everywhere, isn't it? If you're getting used to observing change in yourself and the world, then you don't get so stuck in your views and opinions. You're not so stuck in things that you suffer with them when they change. So it really is a way of unraveling a lot of suffering in life by noticing change. As Ajahn Chah used to say, when things changed, he would say, I was expecting that. So like, for example, I always remember when there was an old monk at Wat Pah Pong, Ajahn Chah's monastery, and this is many years ago, and monks didn't have much in the way of possessions. You didn't get offered much. And this old monk, he'd always wanted a pair of sunglasses. His eyes were fading, he had cataracts, he'd like sunglasses so he could walk around with dark glasses to protect his eyes. Everyone thought maybe he wanted to look cool as well, you don't know, that's a private thing. Anyway, he finally was given his sunglasses and he loved them. Get them out, polish them, dust them, adjust them, put them on, feel so proud he's got his sunglasses, sitting there, everyone was happy for him, he's got his sunglasses. And then one day, somebody stole them. He usually kept them in his bag, and one day he came to his little monk's bag, they've gone, where have they gone? You panic, look around, try and find them, can't find them anywhere. They've been stolen. So the news gets to Ajahn Chah, who sits a bit further along the line of monks. Poor Say's sunglasses have been stolen. And Ajahn Chah just said, yeah, I was expecting that. Ajahn Chah was cut straight to the chase. It's impermanent. You get your sunglasses, but they're impermanent. You either sit on them or lose them, or they break, or somebody steals them. Nothing lasts. Everything is impermanent. If you see impermanence in everything, then it rears its head. It may be inconvenient, but you accept it. You don't suffer because of impermanence. It's not sure. Get your new sunglasses, it's not sure. You feel happy, okay, good, but it's not sure. You feel miserable, it's not sure. So that's one way Ajahn Chah taught. You reflect on the uncertainty of your experiences and things in the world, and it helps you to release you, let go of some of the attachment. So maybe enough for tonight. So I hope that may have been useful for you, and we can end the session here.